The 25th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified in 1967 after the assassination of President Kennedy with strong bipartisan support.
If you were in the room, your question to the White House is what? What should we be demanding as the American public, this White House tells us today?
Well, my question is, why hasn't the 25th Amendment been invoked? That's the amendment that...
There's a report that aides were struck by his presence during their discussions.
I'm certainly not going to get into private conversations that occur. What I can say is, and I spoke to this before,
the 25th Amendment and Joe Biden's removal. Will Kamala and the cabinet do it? Some people say it's appropriate and it's time because Joe Biden can't think or speak or talk or walk. He has no brain, even by his own admission. He says, no, I'm fine. It's only my brain. It's not a joke, Mr. President. People have questions about that. And so we've got reaction on the Hill. A lot of Republicans talking about it. Mike Johnson says it's appropriate. Josh Hawley in the Senate brought it up. Tim Burchett got asked about this. And we know Karine is still fielding and responding to all of the questions from the media about Parkinson's doctors and why Karine keeps lying to them. Maybe she's forgetting things too. But a lot of interesting things happened, and Peter Doocy was also there with Karine getting into it about who's actually running the country. Is it Joe Biden or is it Hunter? A lot of questions here, but here's Mike Johnson. He tells us, the 25th Amendment would be appropriate. Says, if I am in the cabinet hanging out with Joe and Kamala and the rest of them, we're certainly scratching our heads here wondering if this guy can be trusted with our nuclear codes. Probably not.
After the debate, if I were in the Biden cabinet, that was how the question was presented to me. Would I be mulling over the 25th Amendment, applying the fourth clause of the 25th Amendment, which has never before been employed in that way? And I answered honestly, yes, I would. If, in good conscience, if I was in the Biden cabinet, I would be wrestling with that question because I would know what we all know now, that Joe Biden is not up to the task. And it's a dangerous situation for the reasons we articulated earlier. So there's a time to every purpose under heaven. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I think the 25th Amendment is appropriate here. Now, we know, and Chip knows, we all know that the House doesn't have the authority to do that. It's the Vice President of the United States that has to initiate that process. We don't have any involvement unless there's a disagreement between the President and what the Vice President and the Cabinet decide. So we're far away from that eventuality.
We're not going to do that.
I think the notion that the 25th Amendment would be appropriate here is something that most Republicans and frankly most Americans would agree with if they understood the process and how that works. And I think you'll hear a lot more talk about it. I'm under no illusion that they're going to do that. But if I were in the cabinet, many of us were in the cabinet, we would have to honestly say that that's something we'd have to wrestle with.
All right. And we'll see if Kamala does it or not. Probably not, but there's some good basis for it based on Joe Biden's performance recently. But I want to walk through the amendment. And before we get into it, there was this interesting little blurb here. You can see I pulled this document from the governmentinfo.gov website. It's the 25th Amendment summary, and they attach this little historical summation of it. And what is the 25th Amendment? Well, they tell us it was an effort to resolve some issues about the president. What happens on death of the president? What happens on removal or resignation? All these questions were floating around, so they had to write this amendment. What do we do if the president becomes so disabled to such a degree that he can't even debate or take the tall steps? The practice had been well established that the vice president becomes president when the president died. That happened 8 times in our history. Now, presumably, the vice president would become president if the president was removed. Whether the vice president would become acting president when the actual president became unable to carry on, and whether the president could resume office were 2 questions that had divided scholars and experts. Also, 7 vice presidents had died in office and 1 had resigned. So for some 20% of the United States history, there was no vice president to step up. So we had a missing vice president, but an actual president. But the most insoluble problem was that of presidential inability. President Garfield was lying in a coma for 80 days before succumbing to the effects of his assassin's bullets. So 80 days, they're saying, what do we do about this? Wilson was also invalid for the last 18 months of his term. He had a stroke, all right? So he was just out, like Wilson, gone. But, they weren't expected to be on TV, so nobody probably knew. With its unanswered questions, and Wilson, I'm not sure that they had that at that time, right? Wasn't he like 1913? With its unanswered questions, who was to determine the existence of an inability? How does it work? How is the matter to be handled if the president wanted to continue? When should the vice president act? Would he be acting president or president? What's to happen if the president recovers and comes back? Congress finally proposed this amendment after Kennedy's assassination. And with the vice presidency vacant, the president who had previously had a heart attack. So Kennedy gets shot, they put in LBJ, he winks, and he had a heart attack. So the amendment saw multiple use during the 70s, resulted for the first time in our history with the accession of the presidency and the vice presidency of 2 men who had not faced voters. First, VP Spiro Agnew resigned as Nixon's VP, then Nixon nominated Gerald Ford, then they took out Nixon. president. Hearings were then held, and Nixon resigned. Ford then immediately succeeded him, never been elected to an office, then took the presidential oath. Then Ford nominated Rockefeller to be vice president. Hearings were held in both houses, and that the Nixon coup was over. Confirmation voted, Rockefeller took the oath of office, and these two dudes were now in charge. So all of that is what led to the creation of this. Now they have an option to also come in and take the president out. So if the president dies, VP becomes president. Easy. Got that one. Section 1. Section 2. Whenever there's a vacancy in the office of the VP, the president can make a new vice president. Got it. Section 2 is easy. Section 3. Whenever the president transmits to the president pro tem of the Senate, so the president says, I cannot do my duties, then the vice president becomes acting president. And you've seen this one also used like when the president goes and gets a colonoscopy. They temporarily transfer a written declaration over, hey, I'm going to get a colonoscopy for like 3 hours. Dick Cheney, you're the president. And then Bush comes back. Now, Section 4 is the big one. Hasn't happened before yet. Could it happen now? Whenever the vice president, so Kamala, and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, which we don't have another body right now, transmit to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, so to both houses, their written declaration. So Kamala and Mayorkas and all of them are sitting around. They all, Buttigieg comes out, Garland's in there. Joe Biden can't do it anymore. Yeah, right. Give me a break. They're all just good little sheep like the rest of them. And they like Joe not being a puppet. They've had him as a puppet for the last 3.5 years. So they're not changing that up at all. So if they all come, they write their written declaration. So they write a letter, Kamala signs it, they all sign it. They say Joe's unable to discharge the powers unless the party wants him gone, then they'll all do it. If they get an order from Obama to do it, then they'll do it. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. The vice president shall immediately assume the powers and the duties as acting president. So they discharge, they notify the Senate, they notify the House, the cabinet is on board. That's the game. Okay, Kamala's president, acting president right then and there. Then, if the president contests it, so they take it away, when the president transmits, he says, no, I'm fine. He shall resume the powers and the duties of the office immediately unless they transmit within 4 days a majority of either the principal officers of the executive department or of the other body. They must transmit. Thereupon, Congress shall decide the issue, right? So if there's a debate about this, if the president has a problem, Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose. If Congress within 21 days after the receipt of the latter written declaration, there's some timing, determines by 2/3 vote that the president is unable to discharge, the VP shall be the acting president. Otherwise, if not, the president gets the powers back. When the president says, I'm good, he resumes the powers unless the vice president and the majority transmit within 4 days their written declaration that he cannot do it. Thereupon, Congress shall decide the issue. So that's a little bit confusing there, but it's a battle, and I think it'd be up to interpretation. Congress will receive it, pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker, unless, so there might be a gray area in there where the vice president claims to be the acting president, and the president claims, like there's an overlap. It's like the mailbox rule in contract law. Somebody sends notice, and then they send other notice, and Congress is making decisions, and so who is the acting president and who is not? Still kind of messy there. But point is, there's a process for this now, and I still don't think that Kamala and the rest of the cabinet will do it. Now, they tried to create that other body, so they wanted to do this when Trump was in the office. So here's Pelosi with her COVID mask on, explaining that they were going to try to create that other body that could then weigh this and then remove Trump because he was so dangerous.
So I hope you will prepare yourselves for a civics lesson or a presentation on the Constitution of the United States.
Tell us.
The 25th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified in 1967 after the assassination of President Kennedy with strong bipartisan support. Members of Congress have a duty to take all necessary action to preserve continuity of government and protect the stability and integrity of our democracy for the future. That is why today, again, it is my honor to welcome Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, a constitutional scholar, as he introduces legislation to establish a commission on presidential capacity to discharge the powers and duties of the office.
All right, so they were going to create their own little commission and then fill it with their people, and then that commission would not be Trump's cabinet, right? And then that commission could declare Trump invalid, and they could usurp his authority under the 25th Amendment. But here is Hawley. He got asked about this and also brought it up. Says, if Democrats were really concerned about the good of the country, if they really cared about us, which they don't, they'd invoke the 25th Amendment. Biden can't run a campaign. He should not have the nuclear codes. Makes a lot of sense to us. Maybe they'll do it.
First up, there's a live shot bottom of our screen right now as we are waiting this White House press briefing. If you are in the room, your question to the White House is what? What should we be demanding as the American public this White House tells us today.
Well, my question is, why hasn't the 25th Amendment been invoked? That's the amendment that says when the president is incapable of discharging the functions of his office, he needs to be removed and replaced. The cabinet can do that. I mean, we're talking about the election, and of course that's important, but let's talk about right now. Let's talk about the security of the American people. This guy has the nuclear codes, let's not forget. We've all seen the debate footage. We've all seen his press conferences. I've seen him at the State of the Union. This guy is clearly not capable, not only of running for re-election, that's the least of it. He's not capable of being president. He ought to be removed right now.
So that's actually a true statement, okay? Don't get me wrong. It's true, but time will tell. Even Tim Burchett got asked about this, so he was roaming around in the halls of Congress. This clip came over from Howard Mortman over on X, and grabbed this one.
I gotta get in there, guys. Those post offices are not gonna name themselves. What do you got?
What do you think about this resolution possibly invoking the 25th Amendment?
I think politically it's probably not a good idea, but I think reality-wise it is a good idea. I think we need to put party above everything else. We know Joe Biden on the ballot. It's a sinking ship, and that's the argument not to do it. I worry about our country if there's an international event or some kind of tragedy that happens, and we have to have some real leadership, and I question whether we have that now.
What do you mean it'd be a bad idea politically? Do you mean like how?
Yeah, I mean, because it's best to be to leave Biden on the ballot. The Democrats, they won't even show up to vote for him. They'll just leave that one blank and go vote elsewhere.
So do you think Harris would be a stronger candidate?
I do, yeah. I think about that for a second. But yeah, I think she would be over the current president. I think she's a rallying point for certain folks, and this current president, there's nobody really rallying around him.
Energy, enthusiasm. Smart.
Do you think she would be a good contender against Trump?
No, I think Trump would walk the country with her. I think he really would. I don't find her to be a very good candidate. She's done a terrible job on the border, and that's the major issue right now.
Yeah, good analysis. I swear I did not listen to that clip before he spoke, but it's basically exactly what I just said. That politically, it makes a lot of great sense to keep Joe Biden at the top. For our country, it's a disaster, and we're doomed every day that he is in office because he's not actually doing anything. It's the worst of the worst can make things happen in the White House, and there is zero accountability for it. They just blame Joe. In fact, Joe might just be the walking scapegoat for this entire catastrophe. If you're going to ransack the Treasury and rout the country, well, one way to do that is to just have a scapegoat, a figurehead who you're going to pin everything on, and then just put him out to pasture at the end of your feast. So Karine got asked about a lot of this today. Says, Joe Biden's competent. He's fine. He had bad night. But she also got asked about this doctor kerfuffle because we learned yesterday there was a lot of reporting that there was a Parkinson's doctor who took 8 visits to the White House. I think we talked about that as well. And then they released a letter from the doctor. The doctor said, well, I was treating other Parkinson's patients there. Okay. Apparently Parkinson's is all over the place at the White House. So they have the doctor who comes in once a month to treat everybody there except Joe Biden, which is just wild.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it didn't seem to explicitly describe the nature of Dr. Kennard's meeting with Dr. O'Connor. So can you say whether that one meeting was related to care for the president himself?
I can say that it was not.
Not for the president.
Can I just ask why that information that was released last night just wasn't said at the briefing yesterday?
Well, no. Actually, a lot of what is in the letter was said at the briefing, to be very, very clear. I said many of the things that were laid out in the letter was actually repeated right here behind this lectern.
You're an
at
idiot.
This podium yesterday. I said many of the things.
Not the important
and we
things,
got
though.
clarification, obviously, from Dr. O'Connor, but it was in line with what I said. When I said only 3, right? I said only 3 visits that this particular doctor had. I said a neurologist. What I was not able to confirm is the name, and the reason why is because we do not share private information. That is something that we respect, and we wanted to make sure that we protected our consultants here that work with the White House Medical Unit, their security as well.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so the media has just basically had enough of her. Why are you continuing to lie to us? Enough. Now, we've seen a bunch of Democrats just fall right back in line. They've got whiplash because they were racing off of the sinking ship towards the life raft. They're like running hard off the pier. And then all of a sudden, they get yanked back.
I feel like he's beat back this effort to force him to step aside.
Look, you heard the president yesterday when he called into Morning Joe, did about 18 minutes of Q&A yesterday morning. He spoke very forcefully, passionately about where he stands, about how he sees things moving forward. And we also have said many times, we respect members of Congress, we respect their view, but I also want to say there's a long list of congressional members who have been very clear and in support of this president, whether it's the CBC, who gave a full support, the Congressional Black Caucus, for folks who are watching and are not sure what CBC is. They were very much supportive. They said, we think that this is Representative Joyce Beatty, to be clear. We think that the call went extremely well. The president was very responsive. Representative Troy Carter, who's also a member
responsive.
of the CBC.
What a nice comment. He finished the whole call. Yeah.
Elated to hear directly from the president and that he is all in, and we are all in with him. You got a Congressional Hispanic Caucus. They put out a statement in full support of this president, and there are others. And so, look, he is going to focus on continuing to work on behalf of the American people, continuing to build on an unprecedented record.
All right, a lot of Karine. So basically, yeah, she's kind of saying, yeah, he has survived this. They tried to take him out, and they were unsuccessful. So Peter Doocy says, all right, look, if he's not going anywhere and his brain is fried, what is happening in the Oval Office? Is he in charge of the country, or is Hunty Poo actually running things?
I know we had our chat yesterday.
Yes, thank you, Karine. Does President Biden commit to serving a full second term if reelected?
Yes.
Thank you. We know the president says that his health is fine, but it's just his brain, and that he's sharpest before
he was joking, by the way. I just want to make sure that that's out there. And he was making a lighthearted joke. He's speaking off the cuff, and he was making a joke. You know the president, he likes to joke a lot. Okay. He's the same guy who says, I know I look 40, right? So he likes to make jokes. It is a joke. I think people laugh when he says it.
Well he also says he's sharpest before 8 p.m. So say that the Pentagon at some point picks up an incoming nuke. It's 11 p.m. Who do you call? The First Lady?
He has a team that lets him know of any news that is pertinent and important to the American people. He has someone, or that is decided obviously with his National Security Council, on who gets to tell him that news.
So Kevin McCarthy just said that when he was the speaker, many times when we had meetings in the Oval Office, Jill was there as well. When the First Lady's in these meetings, is she making decisions, or is she just advising the president?
No, the president is the president of the United States. He makes decisions.
Why is she in there?
Another family member. President Biden has told me before, he and his son don't have any business dealings together. So what is Hunter Biden doing in White House meetings?
Are you talking about the meeting where they came together from Camp David and the two of them walked to the president's meeting and he was there?
There's a report that aides were struck by his presence during their discussions.
I'm certainly not going to get into private conversations that occur. What I can say is, and I spoke to this before, is that when they came back a couple days at Camp David with his family, he is very close to his family, as you know. It was the week of 4th of July, which is why his family members were here last week. They walked together into the meeting.
Can you say if Hunter Biden has access to classified information?
No.
Good. That's a good idea, because we don't know what he'd be doing with it, because he has some nefarious activities that may have led him to be compromised, which is why it's not a good idea that he is the acting president, or Jill Biden being the acting president. Not good for America. So we've got conversations about the 25th Amendment happening. Karine is still trying to figure out how to deal with the media. The media still has a lot of questions about this. But will Kamala invoke the 25th Amendment? Will Joe Biden go quietly into that good night? I don't think so. I don't think the cabinet would agree with that either, unless things got so bad that they have to act. So far, it's not gotten there for them. So we'll be here to see if it does. We'll love it if you join us as that coverage continues, my friends. Thank you so much for subscribing to our channel. Thank you for liking this video. Thank you for inviting a friend or family member to come over and join us when we go live. We've got another great segment gonna get queued up for you if you missed it on our live. Bragg's prosecutor busted Matthew Colangelo, we know, was very close with the White House Chief of Staff, Jeffrey Zients. And so we'll cue that one up if you missed that here on the next one.